Welcome, Strategy Simplified listeners. I'm delighted today to get to speak with Dr. Nikolaus Lang, BCG Senior Partner and one of the authors of the new book, Beyond Great. In the book, Nikki and his colleagues, Arindam Bhattacharya and Jim Hemmerling, identified 9 strategies for companies to thrive amidst the dynamic forces of social tension, economic nationalism, and digital transformation affecting global business today. Let's jump in. We are so pleased to have with us today Dr. Nikki Lang, a senior partner from the BCG Munich office. We're going to be discussing his book today, Beyond Great. So going to be getting into some of the details of the book, certainly in the show notes. You can see a link to purchase there. But Nikki, thanks so much to join us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Warm welcome from Munich.
Thank you so much. Well, let's dive in. Let's dive into the book. So, you and Arindam and Jim, you came up with 9 strategies that businesses need to do moving forward. Now, these seem to be born out of a set of shifts on globalization that you identified: social tension, geopolitical shifts, technological transformation, that these new fundamental forces, or these ever-changing fundamental forces, really require businesses to operate in a new and different way. Here off the top, could you just speak briefly to each of those 3 forces?
Yeah, of course, Stephanie. I think what you see in the world in which we are now is that, I would say especially in the last decade, in the 2010s, we have seen those 3 forces gaining in momentum and also gaining in impact for global business. First, if we talk about social tension ranges from climate change, where I don't think that I need to give any examples of what's happening. I think if we look at just the last summer, all the fires and all the challenges we see, I think makes it very clear that we are, I think, really at the brink of a massive shift. But also social tension at larger, when you look at the Gilets jaunes movement in France or the social unrest in Chile. There are many situations where actually social unrest and social inequity becomes a big burden for economies and businesses at large. So that's on social tension. Then there's a second movement, which we call economic nationalism. Yeah, and I think you call it geopolitical shifts, which is perfectly right. But where we believe that, especially I would say in the last 5 years, we have seen a constant rise of economic nationalism. And this rise is driven by the fact that you have seen, of course, political decisions ranging from Brexit to obviously the US-China trade tensions that have made global supply chains more and more fragile. Yeah, because if you're importing goods from country A to country B and you don't know if the next day you have to pay 20% tariffs on top, this supply chain really changes. And so in the past, everyone was thinking that the world is flat and that you have a world of free trade. Well, there are a lot of mountains that started rising in the last 5 years. Yeah, and that has been driven, obviously, by the political environment. And maybe just adding to this, COVID hasn't simplified the situation. Yeah, COVID, we have seen what happened with COVID. Suddenly we had export restrictions, we have vaccine diplomacy, we had disrupted supply chains, and things like this. So I think economic nationalism is a reality which will go with us over the next decades to come, whether we like it or not. And then the third topic, which is the digital transformation. Well, people will say, well, digital, we all know that things get more and more digital, but the reality today is that we see the speed of digital ever increasing. Yeah, and again, I think the first iPhone is 14 years old, but still my daughter is also 14 years old. So if I imagine that all the digital transformations happened in her lifespan so far, it's really amazing. And on the other side, we see that obviously through COVID, but also before, the level of remote services, the level of distant working and so on has, I think, increased massively over the last years. And so those three elements, social tension, economic nationalism, and digital transformation, create a uniquely, I would say, challenging environment for business leaders. And that's why Arindam, Jim, and I thought we want to write that book, which we actually started writing long before COVID hit, and which became then, I think, very relevant in that specific situation.
Mm-hmm. I imagine the three of you across your client bases and colleagues probably came up with a huge swath of ideas of all the different things that the company should do with respect to these three forces. You landed on 9 strategies, but can you just talk us through a little bit of the journey of how did you collaboratively identify these 9?
Yeah, well, I think if you just take together the tenure of Jim and Arindam and myself at BCG, we're getting close to a century, or somewhere between 80 and 100 years. Mm-hmm. And over these 80 to 100 years, you really had the privilege to be exposed to many, many corporate realities. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes also the book, I think, uniquely interesting because you have more than 50 in-depth case studies of companies that we have analyzed, companies that have obviously also proved that we can write about them. And I think it was this mixture of these external forces and the reality we see in some of our clients, but also other companies. In this book, we don't only have BCG clients, we have also companies we deeply admire, and we said we would like to profile them. But so from that perspective, I think it was something that came out of this three forces and our big, I would say, personal experience and our colleagues' experience that drove us to write those books and to identify those 9 strategies.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so it already sounds like, this book was written over a long period of time, even pre-COVID. And, at least at the time of writing, you then stated that you didn't see any company out there that was really, truly employing all 9 of these strategies, 3 to 4 at most. Is that still the case? And do you think it's even possible for one company to do all 9 of these well?
Well, I would say the large majority is covering 2 or 3 or 4 strategies. There are a few mm-hmm. companies that are getting close to being strong on many of them. Well, I think at the end of the day, if you want to be successful, I would say in the decades to come, employing these 9 strategies and aiming at being strong, maybe not always best practice, but being strong is actually what is required for a sustainable development going forward. Yeah. So let me give you just a few examples, Mm-hmm. Our strategy number 1 is around, let's say, corporate social responsibility and total societal impact. We believe that there are companies that are very strong in this. Yeah, take Natura, the Brazilian cosmetics firm that also owns Avon and Body Shop and so on. They have put, since their beginning in the 1980s, they have put social responsibility at the middle of their role. It's not something you put nicely on an advertisement, but this was core of their strategy. The way how they produce cosmetics based on organic inputs, the way how they use sales representatives that are being trained among Brazilian women to sell those products. All these things shows that corporate social responsibility and social impact is something which has to come from within and has to really go through the whole value chain. And it's not just a nice marketing gimmick at the end of the value chain. So I think that's something which is very important. Another thing which is very close to my heart is ecosystems. In the past, companies were just buying each other. They were doing M&A and they were doing joint ventures and things like this. We believe that while these topics are still relevant, many new technology development require ecosystems. So much more flexible networks of companies that are working together around a common purpose. So I think that's also something which is very important. And if you take large car OEMs, we have profiled, for example, VW, the car manufacturer, doing autonomous cars and electric cars in ecosystem is something which is very important. A third topic, and then I'll close, is the always-on transformation. Yeah, in the past, in the past, we saw it also in consulting. Companies were doing a transformation, and they said, "Oh, we're transformed, and now we continue on that transformed path for the next 10 years or 15 years, and then we do again a transformation." Well, if you look at a company like Microsoft, for example, that's a company that has taught many people that actually transformation is never over; it's always on. Yeah. So these are just three topics which I believe, next to obviously operational excellence, cost management, and so on, are really elements that companies of the future need to embrace.
Mm-hmm. This would love to shift over into your work then for a second, especially this always on transformation, the continuous improvement mindset that you're kind of speaking to. Has your identification of the importance of that shifted the way in which you want to work with and engage with your clients?
Well, I think yes, because what we have seen over the past is that in the past, obviously, I'm now 25 years almost with BCG. So when you look back in the 1990s, projects tended to be very often limited to a specific study, a specific topic of study, and obviously then a delivery to the senior management. I think over those 25 years, we have seen increasingly the involvement of working side by side with the client, taking over more responsibility for actually not only doing the analysis, but also co-implementing it. Or lately also, when you look at our digital businesses, kind of co-creating with clients new ventures. So yes, of course, I think that's also a much more integrative and continuous way of collaboration than we used to do that 20, 30, 40 years ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you alluded there to your second strategy, right? Leveraging digital technology, offering digital solutions. Certainly for this next generation of consultants, for candidates who are looking at getting into the space, many of them are considering whether or not they want to, off the bat, specialize in this digital space. So tell us a little bit what you think about that growing piece of the industry, and how should those considering consulting today weigh the choice of being a generalist versus focusing in digital?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question, and as I told you, I have a 14-year-old daughter and I have two other further kids, and they always ask what they should do. Though maybe they're a little bit premature in asking those questions, but we have quite a bit of discussions around the kitchen table on jobs and so on. Now, coming back to the question specifically, look, when I joined BCG 25 years ago, I was a pure generalist. Yeah, PhD in business administration, having studied in Japan and China and everywhere, and then joining the industry and doing really a kind of a traditional broadband start, specializing then over time in automotive and mobility, and that's actually my home turf today. Although it's quite interesting thing is that over the last 10 years, my work has shifted more and more towards digital in automotive and mobility. Yeah, so today I would say half of my business is actually digital work for automotive and mobility clients. Now, when you are at the beginning of a career, I think it's really fundamentally, I think both paths are very interesting, and I have lots of discussion with candidates. Again, I think if I may call it, the traditional path or the broad generalist path still has the big advantage of being exposed to a series of different industries and bringing your analytical firepower, if I may say so, to different client settings. At the same time, I think in the digital area, we have very different application areas, yeah, and we have very different possibilities to really use IT skills. Yeah? So at BCG, for example, we have people that are specialized in IT implementation. That's Platinium. We have data scientists with Gamma, or we have digital venture builders with digital ventures. So I think, again, what I want to say is that when you are coming with a strong digital background, you can also actually do a broadband career, given that you have very different areas of involvement at BCG.
Absolutely. I'd love to dive in a little bit and see how a different strategy also applies at home at BCG. Strategy 8, you're talking about building and maintaining a digitally savvy, engaged workforce. So how do you apply that internally? How do you think about that at BCG?
Yeah, well, I think it is critical to have a digitally savvy workforce, whether you are in consulting or whether you are in any other sector, because I think digital has become such a core element of everyone's activity that you would not be able to deliver the performance you expected to deliver without having an understanding there. Yeah. So I think this is clear. And that implies the fact, which I think is really important, is that now coming to your question, what do we do at BCG? I think we have, on one side, we have a very different set of candidates, because I would say all the colleagues that join our digital businesses, including but also our core technology advantage practice, have of course a strong exposure to digital. But then when you look at all the tools we use in our analytics, whether it's Tableau, whether it's Alteryx and other elements, I would say every consultant in BCG has a strong digital skill set and sees this digital skill set evolve over the first 1, 2, or 3 years of his or her career at BCG.
We'll be right back after this quick message.
Are you getting the most out of your team? If you don't feel like you are, check out Management Consultant's corporate training offerings. With bespoke training on the pyramid principle, virtual presentations, and much more, we'll help you take your team to the next level. If they need to perform better, faster, and be more clear in their focus, check out a Management Consultant corporate training offering. Click the link in the show notes to learn more and schedule a one-on-one chat to see how we can help take your team to the next level.
And that second part of that strategy, a broad, deep, consistent engagement of your workforce, attracting top talent, retaining top talent. How are you thinking about that now in your firm and in your area of the business?
Well, I think attracting talent and keeping talent has to do a lot with culture. I think has to do a lot with the way how we do work, with the way how we interact with our clients, and I think I keep always saying our DNA, our culture is one of our strongest assets, and this is why we always make sure that the teams are really closely linked. And this is challenging in a COVID environment where people are working from home, and how can you make sure that that also comes across? But this is, I think, one of the key elements going forward is that we need to, as an industry specifically, we need to make sure that people really have the feeling that they are on purposeful engagements that really support those people that move the world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's certainly a ton of people listening to this today who are wanting advice. How might I join the ranks of BCG? What are one or two pieces of advice you would give those prospective candidates?
We'll be right back after this quick break.
Have you ever heard a new digital trend and thought to yourself, okay, does this really matter? Asking the right questions helps you cut through the noise and get down to what matters most. I'm Jim Hertzfeld, host of the What If, So What podcast, where we discover what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real by asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Subscribe and listen, and together we can turn big ideas into tangible actions so you can get shit done.
Well, I think maybe just coming back to my own history and then having seen how things have evolved over the last 2.5 decades. I think first of all, it's really important to understand the landscape of consulting, and really understand who is out there, who is offering services, and who is that company fitting to my own? How is this company fitting to my own profile? I think this is something which is really important. I think this own honest kind of I would say alignment match between your profile and the different companies' profile is very important. Then I think the second one is obviously I think is reach out, send your CVs, send your reports, and really show maybe also a profile that is interesting. Yeah, I think today we have many great colleagues around the world that have obviously a strong academic track record, but they have also been engaging in professional or pre-professional activities, internships. But we also look increasingly for what have people been doing in extracurricular activities. Yeah, how have people been engaged in social impact activities, in local community activities, or any other activities? I think plays an important role. And then the third topic is I would always thoroughly prepare for the recruiting events and recruiting activities. There are different combinations of interviews and interview settings. And I think that's something which can be also to a certain extent be prepared. So that would be my three things. The first, really scan the market and look at where you believe, do you fit or don't you fit? And also when you ask about BCG, Steph, so the question is whether it's only within BCG, which one of the different aspects of BCG is most appealing to you. Then second, as I said, reach out. And third, prepare well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So just a little bit more then, you talked about, where the firm sits in terms of the broader consulting industry. So when you think about BCG and the specific qualities that you're looking for, what do you want to be true of the next generation of your consultants?
Well, I think there's a mix of I would say what I could call traditional values and new values. But I think, honestly said, for me, the most important element I'm looking at when I see new candidates is first their own empathy. Do people have empathy? Because consulting is about understanding other people's situations. And that you can only do if you have empathy. Then comes the topic of analytical rigor. Then comes the topic of digital skills. And I think also what we're looking at is really, do people have an own purpose in life? Yeah. What is their purpose? What makes them move? I think that those are the four elements I would be looking at.
Absolutely. And in terms of your purpose, what keeps you moving? What is it that you love about this work? What's kept you in it for 25 plus years?
Well, it's interesting because this is a question I get asked very frequently by friends, by colleagues, by clients. And I think for me, it's a mixture of three things. First, I think, and that reflects a little bit maybe the generalist I am, the breadth of the topics. Yeah, so the breadth of the topics, and I would say the intellectual challenge of the topics. That's something which makes me always really very excited about the work I'm doing. There's not one project that is similar to the other one. So that's one. Number two, I think the outstanding quality of the people, and by quality I mean again the topics I mentioned: empathy, cultural fit, engagement, is something which I like a lot. Yeah, and where I take a lot of pleasure from it. And the third one is, I think, is long-lasting client relationships. I'm working with clients that I know for not 25 years, to be honest, but 22 years. Yeah, and accompanying a client for 22 years as a corporation, but also as a person, is something which I find extremely valuable. And seeing how this environment evolves makes me extremely satisfied, and keeps me in that job for almost 25 years.
Absolutely. And a lot of folks are really taken aback and impressed by your longstanding career, your leadership within the firm. You're a human as well. On this podcast, we love to dive into the human element just a little bit. So we'll end off there today. Nikki, tell me what's something that you love to do on the weekend.
Well, my new preferred activity is actually e-biking. So we bought 5 e-bikes, and I love doing really big rounds of e-bike. And the nice thing with the e-bike is that you can go anywhere, everywhere, even with 3 kids between 8 and 14, and you're not stuck somewhere with a bike, and then you have this 300, 400 meter climb in a hill. And I think that makes it. So I would say my e-bike is switched off. The e version of the bike is switched off 70% of the time, but I'm happy to have it for the remaining 30% of the time. So that's what we're doing. And we actually started with this during COVID because there was obviously lockdown and you could only do some sports outside, but we took this now as a new family tradition. So e-biking, yes.
I love that. So you work hard, but you play hard too. You get time with the family. What's one of your favorite places that you love to take them on vacation?
My favorite place to go is southern France. So the Côte d'Azur, it's a great place. It's one of my favorite places on earth, I must say. The combination of climate, of language, of culture, of food. It's just a great place.
Absolutely. Oh gosh, got to spend a summer in Provence and can't wait to get back. So love it. Nikki, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for sharing your insights about these forces and how companies need to respond. Folks will point them to your book. Any other comments here that we didn't get to talk about today in the concept and context of Beyond Great?
No, I think it's just maybe just one point which is interesting from a corporate point of view is Beyond Great is not just only a book, but it's actually also an index. We have benchmarked more than 2,400 companies around the world against this Beyond Great index. So if there are companies interested in seeing how they perform on one or the other of these index variants, I think that's something which could be quite interesting going forward. But besides of that, no, thank you very much. It was a very nice discussion.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Thanks for joining us for this discussion. I can appreciate how continued growth and development in these 9 areas is something every business needs to focus on, and that the creation of the Beyond Great Index takes these concepts a step further, being a way for organizations to benchmark themselves against others across these areas. The book's an easy read filled with lots of real-world examples and will give business professionals and consulting candidates alike a glimpse into strategies businesses are wrestling with across industries today. Thanks again to Nikki for making the time to join us here on Strategy Simplified. You'll find a link to their book, Beyond Great, in the show notes. And of course, if you're interested in working for a firm like BCG, check out our information and offerings at www.managementconsulted.com, where you'll find information and resources to help you understand the consulting industry landscape, interview process, and interview prep.